Look at the coneflower standing by your fence right now. Run your fingers down that stem. If it feels soft, floppy, all leaf and no bud, you are about to lose your August show. And here's the part nobody tells you. The single thing that decides whether your coneflowers explode with blooms in August or fizzle out in July is not water, and it is not fertilizer. It is one small cut made in one narrow window that most gardeners miss completely. Most people get this wrong because they treat coneflowers like roses or hydrangeas. They are not. They are prairie plants, and they follow prairie rules. I learned that the hard way, standing over a bed of leggy bloomless echinacea one August, wondering what on earth I had done. Stay with me, because near the end, I am going to show you a technique. Gardeners at the Mount Cuba Center in Delaware proved over years of trials, one that works even on a tired old clump you have grown for a decade. This is not just for fresh plants from the garden center. This is for the coneflower you have loved for years. I remember the summer I nearly gave up on them. It was 2 Julys ago. I had 3 big clumps of purple coneflower along the south wall. Plants I had babied since spring, and by the first week of August they were a mess. Tall, flopping, splayed open in the middle like a broken umbrella, with maybe 4 sad flowers among all that green. My neighbor's coneflowers, meanwhile, were a wall of purple. Same soil, same sun. I could not understand it. So I started digging, not in the dirt, but into every extension bulletin, every plant trial, every old grower's note I could find. And what I discovered changed how I grow these plants forever. Let me walk you through it, one mistake at a time, because each one costs you blooms, and the last one costs you the whole season. Let me start with the mistake I made first, and the one I see in almost every garden I visit. You feed them too much. I know how that sounds. We are taught that feeding a plant is love. More food, more flowers, right? With coneflowers, the opposite is true, and it is one of the cruelest surprises in the whole flower bed. Here is what is actually happening under the soil. Echinacea evolved on the open prairies of North America, in lean, gritty ground that never saw a bag of fertilizer in 10,000 years. Their whole biology is tuned to poor soil. When you hit them with a rich, high nitrogen feed, you are basically shouting one word at the plant: grow, and it obeys. But it grows the wrong thing. It pours all that energy into soft, green, leafy stems instead of flower buds. That is why my clumps were so tall and so floppy and so empty. I had fed them a general lawn and border feed in late spring, thinking I was helping, and I had accidentally told them to skip the flowers and just make foliage. The University of Illinois Extension puts it plainly. Coneflowers thrive in average, even poor soil, and too much fertility produces weak, floppy growth and fewer blooms. The Missouri Botanical Garden says the same thing in its plant notes. Lean soil, full sun, and restraint. That is the recipe. So what do you actually do? If your coneflowers are already in the ground, stop feeding them entirely for the rest of the season. That is it. If your soil is reasonable garden soil, they need nothing at all. At most, in early spring, you can give them a thin scattering of compost, no more than half an inch spread over the surface, and that carries them through the whole year. No liquid feeds, no blooming boosters, no monthly tonics. The kindest thing you can do for a coneflower is to leave its dinner plate a little empty. That single change stopped the flopping in my beds within one season. The stems came in shorter, stiffer, and standing on their own. But here is where the tension really begins, because getting the food right only gives you a strong plant. It does not by itself give you a plant covered in flowers. And the very next mistake is the one that decides how many blooms you actually see, and for how long. Because most gardeners either never deadhead their coneflowers at all, or they deadhead them completely wrong. So let me show you what I mean, because this one is subtle, and the difference between doing it right and doing it wrong is the difference between 2 weeks of flowers and 2 months of them. When a coneflower bloom fades, the petals droop and go papery, and that central cone turns dark and hard. Most people just leave it. And I understand why, because we hear all the time that we should leave seed heads for the birds, and that is true, in its place, and I will come back to it. But if you leave every single spent bloom on the plant through July, you are quietly telling the plant its job is done. A plant that is busy ripening seed slows way down on making new flowers. It thinks it has already succeeded. It shifts from blooming to seed making, and your August show never arrives. Now, here is the part almost nobody gets right. When you deadhead a coneflower, it matters exactly where you cut. Do not just snip the dead flower off at the top of its own stem, leaving a bare green stick poking up. That bare stick just sits there. Instead, follow that flower stem down with your fingers until you find the next set of leaves, or better yet, a little side shoot or a tiny bud lower down. Cut just above that, right above a leaf node or a lower flowering side branch. When you cut there, you are pointing the plant's energy straight at the next bloom in line. Within a couple of weeks, that lower shoot pushes up and opens, and then another and another. That is how you turn one flush of flowers into a rolling wave that carries you right through August and into September. The Royal Horticultural Society backs this up. Deadheading spent flowers regularly, cut back to a healthy leaf or bud, encourages repeat flowering across the summer on echinacea. I do a quick pass every 4 or 5 days from midsummer on. It takes me maybe 10 minutes with a cup of coffee in one hand and snips in the other, and I do leave the very last flush of the season standing, from about late September, because those dark cones feed the goldfinches all winter, and there is nothing lovelier than a finch clinging to a frosted seed head in December. So you get both, long blooming through the warm months, and food for the birds when the cold comes. You just have to know when to cut and when to stop. That is the piece that turned my scattered blooms into a proper display. But deadheading only works on a plant that is built to rebloom. And here is the harder truth I ran into next. Even with perfect feeding and perfect deadheading, my coneflowers still flopped open in the middle every single year, splitting apart right when they should have been at their fullest. And it turns out there is a specific reason for that and a specific fix. And it has to be done at a specific moment in early summer, or it does not work at all. Let me explain, because this was the mistake that frustrated me the longest. A tall coneflower variety, left completely to its own devices, tends to grow one main flush of stems that all shoot up at the same height at the same time. They get top-heavy, then the first summer storm rolls through. The rain weighs down those big flower heads, and the whole clump splays outward from the center, leaving an ugly bare hole in the middle and all your flowers lying sideways on the soil. I used to stake them, tie them, prop them up with those ugly grid supports, and it always looked like I was running a plant hospital instead of a garden. The fix is something old-timers call pinching, and on the bigger scale, it has a name I will come back to in a moment because it is central to the secret I promised you. But at its simplest, here is what you do. In late spring to very early summer, when your coneflowers are somewhere around 1 foot to 18 inches tall and well before they set any flower buds, you take your fingers or clean snips and you cut off the top few inches of each stem. You are removing roughly the top third of that soft green growth. I know, it feels completely wrong. You are cutting off healthy growth on a plant you have waited all winter to see bloom. Your hand shakes the first time you do it. Mine did. But watch what happens. Every stem you cut responds by sending out 2, 3, sometimes 4 new shoots from lower down, right below the cut. So instead of one tall stem with one flower on top, you get a shorter, sturdier stem carrying a whole cluster of flowers. The plant comes in bushier, it stands on its own, it does not flop, and because those side shoots bloom a little later than an uncut stem would have, your flowering is pushed and stretched right into that prime August window. That is the secret to a coneflower that is covered, not crowned, with flowers. More blooms on stronger stems at exactly the right time. Now, one honest warning, and I say this because I want you to trust me. Do this only in late spring and early summer, and never later than about the middle of June in most of the United States and the United Kingdom. If you pinch too late, after the plant has already started forming its flower buds, you will cut off this year's blooms and delay everything so much you may lose the show entirely. Timing is everything with this one. Early, when the growth is still soft and green and there is not a bud in sight. That is your window, and it is closing a little more every week right now. So we have lean feeding, smart deadheading, and that early pinch. Therefore, your plant should be strong, blooming long, and standing tall. But I promised I would speak directly to those of you whose coneflowers are not young and eager, and this is the part I most want you to hear. Because some of you are looking at a clump that has been in the ground for 8, 10, even 12 years, and it is not responding to any of this the way a young plant would. It blooms in a thin ring around the outside, and the middle is dead and woody. You feel like you have done everything right and it is still failing you. I have been exactly where you are, and I promise this next part is for you and your old faithful plant specifically. Here's what is really going on with an old coneflower clump. Echinacea grows outward from the center year after year, and as it does, the oldest part in the very middle gets crowded, woody, and exhausted. It stops producing strong new shoots. All the life moves out to the edges. This is why an old clump develops that hollow, bald center with a donut of green around it. It is not sick. It is not your fault. It has simply outgrown itself, and it is quietly telling you it needs to be split. The Missouri Botanical Garden recommends dividing coneflowers roughly every 3 to 4 years to keep them vigorous. And honestly, if yours is older than that and struggling, division is the single kindest thing you can do for it. Now, the best time to divide is in early spring as new growth appears, or in early autumn once the heat has broken, not in the blazing middle of summer. So, depending on when you are watching this, mark your calendar. But here is the rescue you can do to carry a struggling old clump through this season right now, without digging anything up. First, cut away and pull out any of that dead woody material you can reach in the center, gently, just clearing out the debris so air and light can reach the crown. Second, if the outer stems are flopping, give those healthy outer shoots the pinch we just talked about if you are still early enough in the season to firm them up. And third, resist every urge to feed it heavily to fix it. A stressed old plant flooded with nitrogen just gets weaker and floppier. Give it lean conditions, full sun, water only when the ground is truly dry a couple of inches down, and let it settle. Then, when the right season comes, lift the whole clump with a fork, and this is the important part. Throw away that dead woody heart in the middle. Keep only the vigorous young pieces from the outer ring, each with a few healthy shoots and a good handful of roots. Replant those in fresh spots. You will get 3 or 4 strong young plants out of one tired old one, and every single one of them will bloom better next year than the exhausted parent ever could. I did this with a 12-year-old clump that I honestly thought was finished. That kind of rescue is exactly why I want to tell you about something before we go further. Because if you have more than one plant in your yard sending you these signals, you need this in your hands tonight. The Complete Plant Rescue Collection is the full, permanent version of everything we are walking through here, and it does not stop at coneflowers. Inside, you get the 5-minute diagnostic framework that reads any sick plant, so you can finally tell thirst apart from overwatering instead of guessing and making it worse like I did. You also get yellowing leaves, decoded clue by clue, and browning edges versus tips versus center, explained as 3 distinct answers, plus the full pruning map for every cut you will ever make, including the exact rose deadheading protocol and the narrow peony window most gardeners miss completely. And if you go for the complete system, you get the exclusive Vol III rescue guide with heritage recovery protocols for plants you thought were gone, and a full 30, 60, 90-day diagnostic calendar mapping out your next 3 months. Here is a free test you can run tonight, no purchase needed. Go push your finger 2 inches into the soil at the base of one struggling plant right now, the way I described for coneflowers, and see for yourself whether it is thirst or something else. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description or the pinned comment. Your growing season is already running, whether you grab this tonight or not. So the sooner you can read your plants correctly, the more of this year you actually get to enjoy. Now let's get back to that 12-year-old clump, because what happened to it 2 summers later is the part you really want to hear. It gave me 5 new plants, and 2 summers later, that corner of my garden was the best it had ever been. You are not losing your beloved plant, you are multiplying it. There is one more mistake I have to warn you about before I give you the big secret, because this one does not just cost you blooms. It can kill the whole plant, and it kills it fastest in the plants people love the most and fuss over the most. And that mistake is drowning them with kindness, overwatering, and planting them where the water sits. Let me put you back in the prairie for a second, because that is the key to understanding this. Coneflowers have deep taproots built to reach down for moisture in dry ground. They are drought tough by design. What they cannot survive is wet feet. Soil that stays soggy, especially heavy clay that holds water, or a spot at the bottom of a slope where rain collects, rots the crown and the roots from below. The plant wilts, and here is the trap. A coneflower with rotting roots looks exactly like a coneflower that is thirsty. Both droop. So the well-meaning gardener sees the droop and does the worst possible thing. They water it more. And they finish it off. I nearly lost a whole row this way in a wet summer. They were wilting in the morning, so I soaked them every evening, and they got worse and worse until I finally dug one up and found the roots had gone soft and brown and smelled sour. That was my lesson. So here is the rule I live by now. Before you ever water an established coneflower, push your finger 2 inches into the soil right at the base. If it is damp down there, walk away. Do not water. A mature coneflower in the ground genuinely only needs watering during long, hard, dry spells. And even then, a deep soak once a week is far better than a little sprinkle every day because deep watering pulls those taproots downward and makes the plant tougher. If your soil is heavy clay, work in some grit or coarse compost when you plant to open it up. And never, ever plant a coneflower in a low spot where puddles linger after rain. Full sun, at least 6 hours a day, and free draining ground. Get that right, and these plants will outlive most everything else in your border. So now you know the 5 mistakes that quietly steal your coneflower blooms. Too much food, wrong deadheading, skipping the early pinch, ignoring a tired old clump, and drowning them with love. Fix those and you will have better coneflowers than 90% of the gardens on your street. But I promised you something more. I promised you the one hidden step, the one narrow window, the single technique that separates a coneflower that merely survives from one that stops your neighbors in their tracks in August. And this is where it all comes together. That early pinch I told you about earlier, there is a refined version of it, a proper method with a name and a history, and it is the real secret to a wave of August flowers on strong, self-supporting stems. Gardeners in England call it the Chelsea chop. And the name itself tells you the exact moment to do it, which is the whole point. Here is the story, because I love this part. The name comes from the Royal Horticultural Society's Chelsea Flower Show, the great gardening show held in London in the last week of May every year. Generations of British gardeners noticed that the days around that show, late May into very early June, were the perfect moment to cut certain perennials back, and so the timing got tied to the show and the name stuck. It is old, practical, hands in the soil wisdom, passed grower to grower, and it works beautifully on echinacea. The Royal Horticultural Society describes the Chelsea chop as cutting back the stems of certain perennials by around 1/3 to 1/2 in late May to early June, either to control their height and flopping or to delay and prolong flowering. And that is exactly what your coneflowers are begging for. But here is the truly clever part, the trick within, the trick that almost nobody uses, and this is what turned my whole bed into a 2-month display. You do not have to chop the entire clump. Instead, you chop only about half of the stems in each clump, and you leave the other half untouched. Think about what that does. The stems you left alone bloom right on their normal schedule, giving you your first flowers. The stems you chopped grow bushier and bloom 2 to 3 weeks later on shorter, sturdier stems, filling in just as the first flush begins to fade. So a single clump gives you a relay of flowers, one batch handing off to the next, stretching your coneflower season deep into August and beyond, instead of one quick burst that is over in a fortnight. One clump, 2 waves. That is the whole secret. And there is a serious credibility anchor behind why this matters so much, because I do not want you taking my word alone. The Mount Cuba Center in Delaware, a botanical garden that runs some of the most respected native plant trials in North America, spent years evaluating dozens and dozens of echinacea varieties side by side. They tracked which ones stayed upright, which flopped, which bloomed long, and which fell apart. And one of the great lessons that runs through that kind of trial work is that stem strength and staggered bloom timing are what make the difference between a coneflower that looks good in a photo for 1 week and one that carries a garden for 2 months. The Chelsea chop is how you engineer that same staggered, sturdy performance yourself, at home, on the varieties you already own, for free, with nothing but a pair of snips. So let me give you the exact recipe so you can do this the moment your window opens. Wait until your coneflowers are somewhere around 1 foot to 18 inches tall in that late spring to early summer stretch, and always before any flower buds have formed. Take clean, sharp snips. On roughly half the stems in each clump, cut back by about 1/3, cutting just above a leaf node so the plant knows where to branch. Leave the other half completely alone. That is it. Then step back and let the plant do the rest. The chopped stems will branch and bush and bloom late. The untouched stems will bloom early. And you, standing there in August with a coffee, will finally have the wall of coneflowers you always wanted, standing up straight, not a stake in sight. This knowledge was never lost. Not really. It lived on in old English borders and in the notes of careful gardeners who passed it over the garden fence, the way I am passing it to you now. It just got buried under a mountain of generic advice that treats every plant the same, that tells you to feed and water and never to cut. But the coneflower is a prairie plant with prairie rules, and once you know its rules, it will reward you more generously than almost anything else you can grow. That little cut, made in that little window, is the difference between wishing and blooming. Here is what I most want you to walk away feeling. You are not going to lose that plant you have poured years into. You now know exactly what it needs, and exactly when it needs it. And that quiet confidence is what turns a nervous gardener into a proud one. You are the kind of gardener who refuses to let a plant you love fade out from advice that was never meant for it. That is who this is for. So tell me one thing down in the comments. Which of your coneflowers are you going to treat first? The young one by the path? Or that old faithful clump that has been struggling for years? And tell me where in the world you are gardening from, because I love picturing these beds all over the country and across the ocean. Go on, leave that comment now, even just a line. I read them and I answer. And if you want to stand with the gardeners who refuse to let their favorite plants die from lazy, one-size-fits-all advice, subscribe and stay close, because the next thing I want to show you is how to put your coneflowers to bed in autumn the right way, the one October step that decides whether they come back stronger next spring or rot away over winter. That one surprises almost everyone, and I do not want you to miss it. Get your snips ready, watch your calendar, and go give that coneflower the one cut it has been waiting for. Before you go, let me tell you what waits inside the Blooming Garden Circle. Members get the deeper version of this video. That one small cut and its exact prairie timing, step by step. In there, you can ask me your own coneflower question. And a real person, me, answers you myself. Never a bot. You won't be alone here. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen and cancel anytime. Now that your coneflowers are safe, let's help your salvia too. There's one simple thing it needs every July. And most folks get it wrong. I'll show you how right here, so stay with me.